Hi, everybody. Welcome once again to English Digest. My name is Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
It's our life unit for the month of September, and today we're going to talk about those chimes that you hear at school and how they got to Taiwan. Of course, I'm referring to those bells you hear during school days. I'm not sure exactly when they use them. When I'm home working, when I'm working at home, I tend to hear them in the middle of the day. You know the tones. They're like...
I live across the street from a university, so I hear that chime all day long. I kind of like it. It makes me nostalgic. Nostalgic just means remembering fondly times in the past. And I know when I first got here, I found it very unique. We didn't have chimes at school that went outside the schoolyard that you could hear much. We had a school bell that would make a sound when school started and then when we got let out. But that was it. When you were growing up, did you have school chimes in your school?
No, not at all. Of course, our school was totally enclosed indoors because it gets cold in the winter. So they did not have an open track area like they have here in Taiwan. There was a track, but it was across the street. And if you had a track meet, you would go there. But just like your school, we just would hear this in the morning, which meant that class was starting, and then ring when it was lunchtime.
It wasn't very pretty.
Yeah, it was kind of intimidating, actually.
It's very sharp and trill. Yeah.
Exactly. So it gets your attention, but it's not as fun as the chimes that you hear here in Taiwan and in Korea and other places. But today we're going to be talking about how that melody got from London to Taiwan. So let's find out by listening to the entire contents of our lesson now at one time. In Taiwan, we students are greeted daily by the distinctive melodic chime of school bells, a familiar sound that for many characterizes the school experience. Surprisingly, this melody's origin can be traced back to the quarter-hour chimes of the clock at the Palace of Westminster in London. I was astonished to learn that this tune is connected to a place so distant from us. I recently discovered that this quintessentially British melody made its way to Taiwan via Japan. Before modern broadcasting equipment, school bells in Japan were actual bells or chimes. Following World War II, both school bells and air raid sirens utilized bells, causing confusion and panic whenever they rang. Consequently, a hobbyist inventor in Hiroshima Prefecture created an alternative timekeeping device to replace the school bell. In 1954, he completed a clock with 4 metal rods that could strike 4 distinct pitches. These were inspired by the Westminster chimes he had heard on BBC radio broadcasts. Little did he know that his personal preference would profoundly impact not only Japan, but also Taiwan and South Korea, making the Westminster chimes a ubiquitous sound for students across East Asia. The presence of the Westminster chimes in both Taiwan and Japan is rooted in historical circumstances, but its significance extends beyond that. The chimes have become an integral part of our daily lives, setting the pace of our routines and reminding us of the bonds and shared experiences shaping our education. Who would have thought such an ordinary sound could have such a fascinating history behind it? Okay, everybody, it's time for us to discuss the contents of our lesson for today. We're talking about the songs or the melodies you hear at school, those chimes from Westminster, and they went from London to Taiwan. We're talking about the remarkable journey of our school chimes. We'll explain the word chime here in just a couple of seconds, but in Taiwan, we students are greeted daily by the distinctive melodic chime of school bells, a familiar sound that for many characterizes the school experience. So yes, indeed, if it's distinctive, if something is distinctive, it's unique, it's special, and indeed you're not going to hear this anyplace else, or there are no other kinds of tunes they play in schools that I'm aware of. They do have different kinds of announcements they make at schools, but these chimes are very common, and we're describing it as being melodic, which means having to do with a melody, and I already whistled it before. You get the idea. It's just a series of notes that is kind of catchy, and you probably can remember it and whistle it yourself at some time. And yes, indeed, we're talking about the chime of those school bells. That means we have chimes here as opposed to bells. I guess a chime is kind of long and thin like a rod, and it's hit with a hammer, whereas bells are big and round and sound different.
They also have chimes if you're a percussionist like my nephew, and you might have a mallet that you hit the chimes with. So those are fun, and they're often in big pieces, orchestral pieces, or symphonic pieces where you have a big orchestra or symphony playing. He played for his high school. He's on a break right now. But yeah, school chimes can be very pretty, very lovely. When I went to college, we had a bell tower that was at the top of a hill, and it was beautiful. At lunch every day, they had real people playing the bells in the bell tower. Just beautiful music. So I got lucky when I went to college and had that. But I do love beautiful sounding chimes. Now, of course, the chimes we're talking about here are very familiar. Seems like every school has the same kind. Is that correct, Tom?
It seems that way. I did not go to school here in Taiwan, so I can't say for certain if that's the case. But it does sound like these are pretty universal in schools in Taiwan. And I'm imagining them to all be pre-recorded. They play it through a broadcasting system, which we'll get to in a second. And it says, again, we've got this distinctive melodic chime of the school bells, and that is a familiar sound that people know. For many, characterizes the school experience. So it's, of course, familiar for many people because it characterizes the school experience. And to characterize means to make something unique and special. It gives the distinctive nature of something. So indeed, if you think of school, or if you hear those bells in the future, you'll think of school.
Yeah, and it does remind me of school. When I first came back to Taiwan after being here when a long ago, I remember the first time I heard the chimes and I thought, oh, there's that sound. And now I live across from a university and I hear it every single day. But I still love the sound. So yeah, it characterizes something. If something characterizes an experience, it just kind of describes it, kind of gives you that feeling. For example, you might characterize your time in school as being very difficult, or you might characterize it as being a wonderful experience because you had a lot of good friends, you had the same classes. You can characterize things in lots of different ways by using adjectives to describe what you went through or what some sort of experience was like.
Now, here's the next sentence. It says, surprisingly, this melody's origin can be traced back to the quarter-hour chimes of the clock at the Palace of Westminster in London. So if you've been to this palace, you'll notice that the clock sounds every quarter hour, maybe at 15 minutes after, at 30 minutes, and then at 45. And then at the top of the hour as well, you'll probably hear these chimes. My impression is that you do hear these chimes at the top of the hour, and then that is followed by the ringing of the hour. So if it's like 10 o'clock, you'll hear the gong 10 times after you hear the melody of Westminster.
Yeah, they want to tell you what time it is once you've hit that top of the hour. So they will have that gong that will sound for every hour. So maybe it's 2 o'clock, you'll hear it twice. It's kind of fun. If you get a chance to go to London, you're going to hear a lot of chimes. All of the churches seem to have bells, so it's kind of fun. So it says here, our writer says, I was astonished to learn that this tune is connected to a place so distant from us. Yeah, we're so far away from London. Who would have guessed? Not me, that's for sure. Moving on to the next paragraph, it says, I recently discovered that this quintessentially British melody made its way to Taiwan via Japan. So it came to Taiwan through Japan. That's what via or via, you can say it either way, means to go through that particular way. If something's quintessentially something, it just means it's really characteristic of that culture or that dish or that kind of music. It's something that you would associate with it, closely associate with it. I didn't know it was British to begin with. It's always fun to learn the history behind different things in our lives because you find out our world is really much smaller than you think, and that we're all connected in different ways. Sometimes in ways we don't even know. So, yeah, this came from the British culture originally. Fun, huh?
Right. It's a unique melody that comes from the UK. I could say, for example, what is the quintessential Taiwanese food? Well, it might be niu rou mian. It might be chou tofu or whatever.
Yeah.
And I know that sushi is the quintessential food in Japan. Notice here also quintessentially is an adverb, but you could also use the adjective as well. Quintessential British melody. Yeah, how did it get to Taiwan? Well, it went via Japan. And before modern broadcasting equipment, school bells in Japan were actual bells or chimes. So again, a chime is a long rod, and that makes a special sound. And a bell is kind of big and round, and that makes a special kind of sound as well. And yes, indeed, they did have those bells in Japan. They were real. They were not going through broadcasting equipment, because we didn't have the modern broadcasting equipment before, so they had to actually use real bells and real chimes.
Right. So following World War II, it says, both school bells and air raid sirens utilize bells, causing confusion and panic whenever they rang. Now remember, during World War II, England was bombed by the Germans. They had air raid sirens that would warn the people that lived in London, take shelter because here come the German planes and they're going to bomb us. A raid is a sudden attack by an enemy. So some sort of enemy troops, or here we're talking about their enemy planes. An air raid, of course. We have air raid sirens here in Taiwan where we practice, right? We practice going underground or taking shelter in case we have enemy planes that come over Taiwan. So those are sirens. A siren is a woo! It's the sound that we hear when there's danger, or there's an ambulance coming, or the police car will have a siren. Those are warning signs or signals, and they're not necessarily welcome. It scares people. They panic when they hear them.
Yep, and of course they used those bells, they utilized those bells in the schools as well and for air raids, so that caused confusion. Confusion is the state of being confused, which means you just don't understand the situation clearly. You just don't know what's going on. You are confused, and of course confusion here is the noun form, and those bells caused people to be confused, or it caused confusion. And it also caused panic. What's happening? Is a plane coming? Are they going to bomb us? Oh, no, we're in trouble. And so they had to do something about that. And we'll find out what they did in just a couple of seconds. But right now, let's listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们今天要来谈谈学校的钟声，噔噔噔噔。听到这钟声是不是觉得有点烦啊？又上课了。还是你是比较乐观的人，听到钟声就想说喂，下课咯。好，当然不管怎么样啦，我们的学校钟声从小啊、中啊、大啊都是这个样的旋律，这是很熟悉的，也是一种就是我们学校的特色嘛。所以在第一段呢，我们看到了第一句。其实第一句有一个限定用法关系子句，不知道你有没有注意到，在逗点之后有一个 a familiar sound， 它是一个很熟悉的这个声音啊，就是我们说的 school chime， 就学校钟声。后面的 that 因为被插入了 for many， 对很多人来说，所以你可能在第一句话看到这边觉得有点怪怪的，没有关系，我们把先行词 a familiar sound 先划线，后面的 that 到句尾左右括号，然后逗点中间的 for many 指的是对很多人来说，所以它是一个限定用法的关系子句。那当然啦，我们这个钟声是怎么来的呢？大家从来都没想过。可是你知道吗？这个钟声旋律的起源居然可以追溯到伦敦西敏宫时钟 的报时的那个声音哦，哇哦！而且这个旋律啊，其实跟距离我们如此遥远的英国居然有关系耶！大家是不是觉得很惊讶呢？我们接下来啊要看的，除了说是有关于钟声之外，因为这个文章被设计成综合测验克漏字嘛，那克漏字当中通常都会有一题是文法，像我们今天看到的第3题就会跟时态有关哦，所以我们等一下第3题会好好的琢磨琢磨。好，我们接下来先看一下第2段的文意。第2段呢，作者告诉我们，他用一个很轻松的口吻跟我们讲说，他说，哎呀，我最近发现其实这一段非常典型的英式旋律，居然是透过日本传到台湾的耶。日本在1956年的时候，学校的钟声就改成这种噔噔噔噔的声音，而不是摇铃了。那当然是有一个故事在后面，所以我们来看一下第2段。请 focus 在第3句的地方，第3句很重要。他说，在第2次世界大战之后啊，学校的钟声还有空袭警报，因为都是用摇铃的方式，一摇铃大家就很害怕，不知道到底是又来空袭警报还是怎么样，所以后来才改掉学校的钟声。不过这第2段第3句又稍微看一下哦，因为逗点之后有一个 causing， 对不对？你想说它又是个句子的简化，什么样的简化？是 and 的简化吗？还是which的简化呢？其实都可以啦。如果你说它是which的简化，那么它就是逗点 which caused。如果你说它是 and 的简化也 OK， 那它就会变成逗点 and it caused。那关键就来啦，如果你觉得是刚刚第2种 it 代表的是什么呢？ it 代表的是逗点前面的这整句话，也就是2次世界大战当中摇铃的声音是学校的钟声，但是也是空袭警报的声音，而这件事情就会造成大家的混乱，然后甚至是很惊慌。所以如果你觉得它是一个关系子句的简化的话，逗点之后的 which 它其实代替的是逗点前整句话这件事哦。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're tracing the history of the school chimes here in Taiwan. Turns out that they actually began in a place far, far away in Europe, and that's the UK. The British used to use these distinctive melodic chimes at their schools. And they came to Taiwan via Japan. Japan had them first, and then, of course, when the Japanese were here, the Taiwanese adopted those particular chimes, and now they symbolize our schools. But they did come to us via the UK. Now, we discovered that they're really a quintessentially British melody. It's something that all the Brits are familiar with. I had no idea. I think that's so cool. They were school bells in Japan. Now, long ago, when this particular melody made its way here, they were using just actual bells or chimes. But nowadays, we have electronic equipment that can mimic these sounds, so we don't need actual chimes or bells. Although some churches still have the chimes and bells, which is nice. I think the schools are just using a recorded chime that comes, whenever it's time for them to ring it. Now, we talked about, following World War II, that school bells and an air raid siren utilize the same bells. So it caused a lot of confusion and panic. People got scared when they heard these sounds. They thought, is it an air raid or what is it? Is it a school? It was just too familiar to them. So what did they do to change things? Well, we had a very clever man in Japan. He was called, he's a hobbyist inventor. So he invented things as a hobby. I love these kind of people. He was in Hiroshima Prefecture, and he created an alternative or a different way to keep time. It was a device that he invented to replace the school bell.
And, of course, as you know, Hiroshima is Guangdao in Japan, and a prefecture, of course, is a political division similar to the Xian here in Taiwan. Hiroshima Ken, as you'd say in Japanese, and he created an alternative timekeeping device to replace the school bell. So that's what he invented, and in 1954 he completed a clock with 4 metal rods that could strike 4 distinct pitches. And indeed, a pitch, of course, is a note, and of course we've got da-da-da-da, those 4 notes, and they're repeated in different orders. Right, as of course we listen to the melody when school is starting or when it's finishing or whenever they play those tunes. But in any case, this was actually a clock that had those 4 metal rods. A rod, of course, is something long and straight, like a bar. It could be made of wood or metal, and in this case, it's probably made of metal, so when something strikes it, it creates a tune. Or a tone.
Yeah, we also use rod to talk about a long bar that sometimes is inserted into the human body. Maybe you've had a bad broken leg or a badly broken arm. Sometimes they have to use a rod to help support the bone that has been broken. But yeah, they use these rods that could strike 4 distinct or unique pitches. All the pitches are different, and these were inspired by the Westminster chimes that this hobbyist inventor in Japan had heard on the BBC radio broadcast. That's how he heard them. Little did he know, he had no idea, that's what that means, that his personal preference would profoundly impact not only Japan, but also Taiwan and South Korea. Oh, they have it too, making the Westminster chimes a ubiquitous sound for students across East Asia. We're all familiar with this. I'm going to run home and tell my friend who teaches in South Korea at a university. I didn't know we shared this particular sound. If something's profound or something profoundly impacts you, it just means it has a really deep or a great intensive effect on you. If you are profoundly grieving, you're very, very sad, or you're profoundly affected, it changes the way you think about something, perhaps forever. Impact is just kind of the effect something has on you. It could be emotional, it could be physical, it could be have an impact on society. It has a lot of different ways that it could have an impact or influence you.
Now, notice here, impact is being used as the verb, and technically you should say impact, but a lot of people just say impact for both the noun and the verb. But indeed, it would profoundly impact not only Japan, but also Taiwan and South Korea. And that would make the Westminster chimes a ubiquitous sound for students across East Asia. Ubiquitous just means it's all over the place. Like in Taipei, there are taxis everywhere. Taxis are ubiquitous in Taipei.
So are drink shops.
Yeah, exactly. The bubble milk tea shops are quite ubiquitous. They're all over the place. And moving on now to the final paragraph, it says, the presence of the Westminster chimes in both Taiwan and Japan is rooted in historical circumstances, but its significance extends beyond that. So a circumstance, of course, is a special kind of situation, a fact, or a condition. And, of course, it's related to what's going on. So, indeed, it's rooted in historical circumstances or historical events which took place. It, of course, came from this inventor in Japan. I guess he was probably listening to shortwave radio or something, practicing his English listening comprehension ability. And he tuned in and he heard these chimes being broadcast on the BBC. And he thought, I guess I'll use those chimes in my new invention for that school clock.
Yeah, so it says here it was rooted in historical circumstances. It just means that's where it came from. That's what the cause of it was, its origin. It's kind of cool. So the chimes have become an integral part of our daily lives, a very important part. If something is integral, it just means it's a very, very important part. It's central to something. So you want to give it a lot of notice because it's just part of your daily lives. Sometimes I don't even hear the chimes anymore because I'm so used to them all day long. It says here, they set the pace of our routine. The pace of something is the speed. But if you're going to use pace, you have to remember to tell us if it's fast or slow. I like to jog at a slower pace than my friend who likes to run as fast as possible. The pace of your life could be very fast, or maybe you're more laid back and your pace is kind of more comfortable.Exactly.
So you hear those chimes and they remind you of what you're supposed to do in school. And of course, this sets the pace of our routines and reminds us of the bonds and shared experiences shaping our education. So yes, indeed, you know this now that these chimes are played in schools in Japan and in Korea. So imagine that you all have that in common.And who would have thought such an ordinary sound could have such a fascinating history behind it? Indeed, I didn't know this myself before.
I didn't either.
I did know that those chimes were from the UK, but I couldn't figure out exactly how they got to Taiwan. And now I know.
Now you know. Now you know the whole story. Kind of fun. Right now, someone who's going to fill us in on a little bit more info is our Chinese teacher. Let's listen now.
所以啦，在日本的广岛县有一个业余发明家，他就创造了一种替代计时装置来取代学校的铃声。当时是1954年的时候，他完成了一个带有4根金属杆的一个时钟。那这个4根金属杆其实就是会发出这个学校铃声 chime 的这4种音阶。那4个音阶如果用 C 大调来看的话，就是哆咪瑞嗦。哆瑞咪哆，就反正就是这4个这个所谓的音阶啊，就形成了学校的钟声。那这些音阶啊，所谓的音高，这个灵感啊，是这个业余发明家他以前有在 BBC 广播当中听过西敏宫钟声的旋律。不过在这里第2段的第6句就来到我们今天的重点哦。第3题，这个时态到底要选哪一个？而且除了时态之外，又扯了一个关系子句在里面。B 的选项是 who heard， 好像也对，我们赶快来看一下这个句子。这个句子说啊 ，these were inspired， 这样子的 pitch， 这一些所谓的音高音阶是被引发、被激发、被给予灵感 by the Westminster chimes。后面从 he 开始到句尾，我们先把它左右括号起来，因为其实先行词就是这个西敏宫的钟声，而逗点西敏宫的钟声后面 he 后面这个 he 啊，指的就是这个广岛的业余家 he 什么 on BBC radio broadcasts。所以这里的第3格其实本来应该是一个动词就好。那这个动词到底是 A he was heard 还是 C to be heard 呢？如果是 A 的话呢，它就有被动式。问题是他是听到 BBC 的钟声，所以不可能选 A。那 C 呢 to be heard 有即将未来要被听到的意思，所以也不对。那 D 的选项是 had heard， had PP 其实通常会用来强调一个过去时间之前，所以我们再看一次这个句子，这个过去时间就是 were inspired， 那么之前所听到在 were 之前过去的过去，所以当然会用D had PP 用来强调之前曾经听过，所以后来就引发了有这样子的灵感。不过第7句也很重要哦 Little did he know， 但是这个业余发明家所不知道的是，他自己个人的喜好居然还影响日本、台湾、韩国，所以影响这么广泛，这是他所不知道的。那么第7句为什么是一个倒装句呢？因为 little 在英文当中被视为是否定字，否定字放在句首的话，句子形成的倒装感觉像是疑问句耶。所以 know 知不知道，你知道吗？ Did you know 我们会接助动词，所以 little did he know 不是问句，而是一种否定字放句首的倒装。这些否定字除了 little 之外，还有 few F-E-W， 甚至是seldom S-E-L-D-O-M 很少耶，还有 rarely barely hardly 这些字都是否定字，适用于这个句型。那当然这些钟声啊，在台湾跟日本都有历史背景，不过意义并不仅只是如此，因为这个钟声是我们日常生活很重要的一个部分。不过我们还是可以了解一下，在过去的历史当中，这个钟声为我们带来有哪些影响。以上是我们今天的内容，我是安娜，我们下次见。
That's all for today's lesson. Thanks for joining us. And indeed, when you hear those chimes in school, remember that people are probably listening to those chimes in Korea and Japan at the same moment. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.